What is going on, y'all? Robert Sykes, KetoSavage.com, KetoBodybuilding.com, and I'm coming back at you with a vlog update for the building series. This is week 13. So, if you can recall from last week was the start of the reset, so to speak. So, a drop in calories from the height of my building phase down to about 3,400 calories. And I was pretty much targeting about 300 grams of fat, 150 grams of protein, and about 20 grams of total carbs last week. And if we look at my intake, I pretty much did that. Hopping over to the AI here, you can kind of see fat intake through the week, protein intake through the week, carbs, calories, pretty much more or less right where I wanted them to be. If you can tell, though, my weight has actually been trending upwards a bit from last week. So how could that possibly make sense? I'm eating significantly less calories than the 4,700 calories that I was averaging, yet my weight has gone up. And I have been very adherent to these macro goals all week. And this is an interesting topic, so let's talk about it. A lot of people will start a prep. They'll start a fat loss phase. They'll come to work with me, and they'll notice that we'll clean up their diet significantly. Maybe they're nailing the macros perfectly, and they oftentimes do lose weight the first week, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they actually see an increase in weight. Here I have, in theory, dropped my calories more than 1,000 from what they were, all the while still in a surplus, but considerably dropped from what they were, yet my weight has trended upwards slightly. Well, there's a lag effect that takes place. The same is true in a building phase as in a cutting phase. And there is a lag effect that takes place. Whenever I'm working with a client, and I experience this myself, but we do our competition, we get to the very leanest we get to, our calories are the lowest they get, and we start reverse dieting up from that and actually start increasing calories, and many of them will experience their weight continue to drop even after the reverse diet has started and their intake has increased significantly. Why could that be the case? It's because of that lag effect. Your body builds up some forward momentum, and it's like a freight train that can bust through plateaus. And that's a positive thing if you leverage it correctly. But this is why you have to have like consistent effort put forth, whether you are increasing intake or decreasing intake, to build up that forward momentum. So just as I've been eating a ton prior to last week's commence of this reset, I've got some forward momentum built up. My weight is going to continue to trend upwards for a bit. Now, that said, this morning I actually woke up at a slight low. I woke up at 198.5. So maybe a week of hitting the macros with the deficit or with the decrease will start to result in that downward trend a little bit going forward. But I was adherent to these macros for that entire week and saw an increase in weight. So let that be a lesson to you. Don't feel like you're doing something wrong if you don't start dropping scale weight after a day or two of hitting your macros perfectly and cleaning up your food sources. Like, that's just not the way it works. It can take some time. It takes oftentimes a week at least, sometimes more, to kind of get that ship turned the other direction. It's kind of like a big freight liner, a big ocean liner. If you've got a whole lot of forward momentum and you start turning, like, it takes a while for that to turn. And same is true with our body composition, body weight, intake, so keep that in mind. So now that I am actually starting to drop weight, in theory, from today at least anyways, we're going to do a check-in for today. So we're going to move over to establishing our protein threshold because we've had that week to establish our baseline. Today is the 8th. And again, I woke up at 198.5 today. And we're going to be decreasing our fat intake and increasing our protein intake, as is typical with this protocol of mine. So in establishing our protein threshold in phase 2, my target fat was about 300 grams. So I'm going to drop that down to about 290. And we're going to actually increase our protein by about 5 grams. And we're going to keep carbs probably around 20 grams total carbs. So that's what we're going to be targeting. Actually, I might drop a little bit more aggressively with the fat, 285 instead of 290. And that's kind of where we're going to target our intake for this week, going into the second week of this, reset, so to speak. So there's that. I took some pictures just now, took my InBody scan. My InBody scan actually showed a slight drop in body fat as well. Granted, those are going to be highly volatile based off of fluid levels, but according to my InBody, I went from 21.6% down to 20.1%. So a slight drop in body fat via the InBody machine there. My intake has dropped a little bit. My weight has dropped a little bit. So we would just continue on this path for the next several months probably. Again, I do not want to drop below 2,500 calories, but I've got about 800 calories or so to play with before I get to that point, so I'm not really worried about that. But I've got the 50-mile march coming up in about 6 weeks. I want to lose a few pounds in preparation for that. And I also want to lose a little bit of excess body fat in preparation for hunting season, in which case I'll be going out west and putting in quite a few miles hiking through the mountains. So no sense in carrying excess body fat there. I'm going to throw some pictures up on the screen right now. These were just taken. So this is my weight composition this Monday. And you probably can't tell any difference whatsoever. Again, you're not going to expect to see much composition change in just a week. But I do anticipate these tightening up a little bit over the next few months. Again, I do not want to dip into a deficit via my baseline intake as I would if I were going into a competition prep, because I am not going into a competition prep right now. I just want to clean things up and kind of gravitate a little bit closer to that 180-pound body weight. I think there's tremendous benefit physically, physiologically, and psychologically in me having put on this much weight and kind of tipping the scales at about 200 pounds, 6-7 months post-show. I think allowing myself more food freedom, allowing myself more food variety, allowing myself to put on some body fat has all been a very good thing for me. My strength markers have all improved. My strength markers continue to improve. So I don't think anything there has been a negative. However, I don't need to be this big going into an effective building phase, especially throughout hunting season, because I'm trying to have an effective hunting season as well. And it's hard on my joints if I'm carrying an extra 20 pounds that I don't necessarily need to be carrying. So there's pros and cons to everything, but you also have to be very objective and very subjective with your reality. So I'm going to say something that may be offensive to people, but it's not meant to be offensive. So let me preface this conversation with that, because everything is going to be based off of one's perspective, and it is all relative. Like me comparing my weight and body fat percentage is going to be different than how I would compare somebody that's, 400 pounds and they've been morbidly obese their whole life and they've just successfully lost 20 pounds. That's great. I want to encourage that. I'm hard on myself. I'm very hard on myself. So for me, 20% body fat, that is the higher end of what I feel comfortable. I think there is benefit for me experiencing that upper threshold to kind of re-solidify in my mind that, hey, look, I am a legitimate fat ass right now. I don't want to continue this indefinitely. So I think there's benefit for that. But in my mind, from my perspective and my composition as a bodybuilder, I don't need to be that big indefinitely, obviously. So I think there is benefit for me kind of oscillating between that 12 and 18%. Now, I recognize that some people that are morbidly obese would love to have that physique, and that's fine. Everybody's going to have their own unique perspective, and I want to encourage everybody to seek out improvement in whatever that may look like for them. For me, it would not be acceptable for me to maintain that for months on end. I'm glad that I got to that heavier body fat percentage. I'm glad that I experienced what that felt like. I'm glad that I gave my hormones and my metabolism a time at that composition, but I do not want to stay there for long, which is why I'm now kind of oscillating on the lower end of that and going more towards the 12% body fat, which will probably put me at around 180 pounds. So that's kind of what I'm striving for there. That's my reasoning behind my own compositional goals and changes. So again, find what that looks like for you as an individual and rock and roll with it. So there's that. That's our plan for this week. As far as macros go, we're going to be dropping our fat by 15 grams. We're going to be increasing our protein by 5 grams. And pretty much everything else will hold constant. I'm going to be eating pretty much the same foods, ground beef and eggs, or ground lamb and eggs is my base. Keto Brick a day, heavy cream in my coffee. Since I am not in a prep right now, I'm allowing myself a little bit more variety and flexibility than I would if I were in a prep. For instance, I'm having 1 cup of coffee a day made from a barista at a local coffee shop, and I'm not having them weigh out my heavy cream. I'm just guesstimating it to be about 4 tablespoons per coffee. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. If I was in a prep, I wouldn't do that. I would weigh everything out. I would bring a measuring spoon with me and do it on site. But I'm not in a prep, so I'm going to allow myself that flexibility. During the 4th of July this past week, I had beef ribs instead of ground lamb and eggs. So I had a little bit of variety there. I weighed everything, but a little bit more flexibility and nuance than I typically would allow myself in a prep. And I think that will make this that much more sustainable, so that when it is time for me to be in a prep, I can tighten it up that much more. So that is that on the week update. That's a wrap, ladies and gents. Appreciate y'all tuning in. Next week, I'm actually going to be in Brazil all week. So I'm not really sure what things are going to look like, but I will, I'm sure, find a gym, take progress pictures, bring my food scale and my body weight scale, and keep y'all as up to date as I possibly can. So next time I see you, it'll be in Brazil. Take care.